So, if you're just joining us, as of just before I logged in, we had 149 people sign up for this, which is pretty rad. And I had a 100-person limit on my Zoom account. And so this morning I was like, oh no, that means some people are going to get locked out. And was kind of freaking out about like, how do I say like, I don't like come to the next one and whatever. And I posted something about it on Twitter. And then within a few minutes, the developers of Reaper reached out to me and they're like, can we throw you some money to upgrade your Zoom account? So now I can handle up to 500 people on Zoom, which is pretty amazing. And just to be super clear, I'm not getting paid to do this. This is like my gift to the radio community based on, my decade plus of experience working with Reaper and also like 20 years of working in radio and sound. And so I want to share this with you all, but this is just something that I'm doing because, well, I am sort of selfish about it in the sense that I want to collaborate with more people who are using this software. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that. But one just sort of big note that I'd like to make is I'm going to be giving you some tools today. You can use them for whatever you want. You can use them to make money. But the thing that I would please ask you not to do is don't charge anyone to distribute them or don't, I'm giving them to you for free. So pass them on in that spirit is what I'm asking. So for those of you who don't know, who am I? My name is Brendan Baker, and I am a radio and podcast producer. I've been doing this, well, I think I started in like 2007. And my background is in public radio mainly, but obviously that's sort of turned into podcasting. And before that, I've just been kind of a sound person, sound musician, geek, and I consider myself largely self-taught. I went to a liberal arts school and studied music and also English lit, and that's how I found myself in radio. But on the music side, I was really interested in electronic composition and collage. And so these are things that I've kind of like taught myself over a long period of time, and I'm hoping to pass on some of that. But then as far as my podcast experience goes, after freelancing in public radio for a bit, largely focusing on engineering because that's sort of how I could make money when I first moved to New York. It was a recession and I was picking up freelance gigs, mostly recording interviews and doing engineering and, filling in on production work and that kind of thing for a long time. And eventually I started collaborating with Nick Vanderkolk, who does the Love and Radio podcast. And he and I worked together for almost 5 years. That was the project that I first started really digging into Reaper with. For a long time, well, not for a long time, but for the early year of my collaboration with Nick, I was really insisting that we use Logic. Worked on Love and Radio for about 5 years, and then after that, I worked on this project with Marvel, the Wolverine podcast. Did a couple seasons of that. So I have had my hands in some like kind of interesting things that I've worked as a reporter, I've worked as a producer, I've worked as an engineer, I've directed a fiction show, I've led teams, I've supported people in teams, I've worked as a consultant. So I've seen how like different parts of the radio world all center around software. Part of the reason I'm doing this, as some of you might know, there was an article that went around the internet about a week ago talking about, here I can share my screen and just show it to you. Pro Tools proficiency may be keeping us from diversifying audio. And I found it was an imperfect argument in my opinion, but it raised a lot of points that I think are valid, which, first and foremost is that editing software is super expensive, and a lot of people don't have access to it. So I'm going to put this link in the chat, and y'all can read it on your own time if you'd like. So that's kind of what got me on this whole train of thought. Actually, I've been wanting to do something like this for years, making a Reaper template, giving it out to people, talking about Reaper, evangelizing about it. And, with the pandemic and, the kind of upside of us all learning how to use Zoom is like now it's actually possible for me to do this in front of you with a lot of people in a lot of different places. So that's exciting for me. And it just felt like now is the time to try it. So today's a little bit of an experiment. It's the first time I've done this, and it's the first time that I've done it with so many people too. Another thing that I think is frustrating to me about Pro Tools is that it's really finicky about what computers it runs on. I've had a lot of people tell me like, oh, I just upgraded my software or my operating system and now Pro Tools doesn't work, or I need to buy a whole new computer because of Pro Tools. And that's crazy to me because one of the things that's really cool about Reaper is that it runs on all sorts of machines, including like I have it running on a G4, Mac Mini. So it works. So it's not gonna like, you're not gonna have 100 tracks running, an old computer like that. But part of what I'll be doing today as I install Reaper with you is this is a 2010 MacBook. And this is what I'm going to be doing my installation demo on the Mac side using. And it just goes to show you that you can use older hardware and the software still keeps up. Other reason why I'm doing this is I do kind of want to be a little bit disruptive. We all know that Pro Tools has been considered an industry standard for a long time. And I think that this is a really strong alternative. There are some reasons why Pro Tools has become the industry standard. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I am trying to sort of stir things up a little bit. So if you find what I'm doing here today helpful, if you can let people know. In particular, I'd really like to get these tools in the hands of producers who don't have access to institutional training, and open it up to people who just haven't had the opportunity to really dig in with Pro Tools. And the other big thing about what I'm doing today is that I'm giving you a specialized version of Reaper. You're going to download the generic version, but I'm going to give you what's called the configuration file. And this configuration file has all of my sort of tweaks. It's kind of like peeking into my brain a little bit, which is kind of vulnerable for me, but it's based around a lot of Pro Tools key commands. So part of what I'm trying to do here is also make it so people can start an editing workflow that is reminiscent of Pro Tools and borrows the things that I think are strong about Pro Tools and then also builds on top of it. And ultimately, I want to leave you guys with an understanding of how you can customize it to keep making it better for your own workflows, because what's good for me might not be good for you. And that's one of the things that I think Reaper really excels at. Why should you listen to me? I think I've already sort of said I've worked in various parts of the radio community, and I've also used a lot of different types of software. So I know Pro Tools quite well. I also use Logic for music composition. I think it's great for its virtual instruments. Unfortunately, Logic is just Mac based. I use Ableton Live almost every week for my own just sort of sound collaging type stuff. And so part of what I'm trying to do also is like borrow workflows that I like from those programs and kind of pool them all together into this one system. And it's the other thing that I would ultimately like to get into, and I'm worried that I might not have enough time to today, is that it's not just about engineering, in my opinion. I think Reaper also has some real strengths in terms of how it edits and how you can manage files and how you can keep track of things that, in my opinion, are much more superior to other tools that are available. And so towards the end today, I would like to talk about that. So if I don't get there, remind me, because I might forget. I might get a little bit deep into the actual engineering side of things. But there's some more esoteric reasons that I like Reaper, and I haven't listed them all out. And it's something that I feel like I know in my bones more than I've am able to sort of demonstrate all in front of you. But my hope is that by you getting your hands on it, that you'll get a feel for that as well and realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. And it's really deep because it's so flexible. I'll be showing you how you can customize different key commands, how you can connect different key commands together to make new functions that weren't possible beforehand. So one of the things that I've really loved about it is that I keep learning from it whenever I go into it, which sounds kind of woo-woo, I guess, but it's true. Like every project that I do in Reaper, I'm like adding a new tool to my toolbox or a new move, or and then as you might expect, there are projects where I have to use Pro Tools for whatever reason because of the folks I'm collaborating with. And I find that really frustrating because I'm like, oh, there are all these time-saving things that I know how to do, and now I can't do them anymore. And I feel like I've got my hands tied behind my back. So Reaper's deep is one of the reasons why I really love it. I've also just over the last week gotten a lot of people asking me about comparing it with Hindenburg, and I won't spend too much time doing this. I think Hindenburg has a very different design philosophy, and I appreciate what they're doing in terms of getting people to make radio. Hindenburg is all about having a streamlined set of tools and workflow. And the thing that I think is cool about Reaper is that you can have that more streamlined, simple approach to it, but it has the depth, it has all the power of Pro Tools. And honestly, like there may be like 5 things, I can count on one hand the number of things that I can't do in Reaper that I would like to do from Pro Tools. So the answer is often with Reaper, like, when someone asks, how do you do this? The answer is like, yes, you can do it X and Y, Z number of ways. And it's kind of up to you to figure out what is the way that just works best for your workflow. So I'm going to show you my workflow. What you won't get today, just so you know, I'm not going to go super deep into like audio engineer training. I will make references to like EQs and compressors and limiters when I'm giving a demo of the template. But I'm not going to talk a little bit of very much about like why I've set them up the way I've set them up. And for those of you who have engineering experience, you can poke around in it and get a sense of why I've done what I've done. But the template is designed to be sort of just starting to work and getting a relatively solid mix pretty quickly. And ultimately my hope here is that, you'll take what you've got today and you'll kind of run with it, tweak things for your own needs, and that you'll share it with other people, and maybe build a critical mass of users who are using this. And ultimately, I do hope to do one of these kinds of things for people who are like straight up engineers, because I want to close the loop and I want them to see what I see in it. And I'm not expecting that they're going to dump Pro Tools. I think that would be naive of me, but I do think that it's possible to have these things kind of in parallel systems, parallel worlds. And I don't know, if you're like me, once you fall down the rabbit hole, it's really hard to climb back out of it. All right, so I'm going to show you my Reaper, and let's just talk a little bit about Reaper. What are we seeing here? So right now, we have a single track. This is sort of the default Reaper setting. So whenever you open up Reaper, you're going to get something like this, where it's just a single track. And actually, I'm going to give you some other things in the chat here. I'm going to give you a couple audio files in the chat, so you can just test. If you have your own audio files handy, you can use those. But I'm going to send you 2 links. One is just a little bit of voice that I recorded, and one is a little bit of music. And yeah, just drag and drop it right into Reaper. You don't need to import or anything. And that's kind of the way Reaper works. It's very drag and drop friendly. And the first time you put in audio, it's going to read the file and do a little bit of analysis to calculate these peaks, so the different waveforms. So try playing it with the space bar. Here's just a little bit of test audio to make sure that your audio device drivers are configured properly in Reaper. So some things just to know about Reaper in general. In Pro Tools, you have mono tracks and stereo tracks, and in Reaper, they're all the same track. In fact, you can have MIDI and audio on the same tracks, which seems sort of weird, but actually works in a cool way. So just be aware that like tracks are tracks in Reaper. There's no mono, there's no stereo. You are able to configure tracks for the power users. You can click on this little panel up here, and you can have like multi-channel tracks and stuff like that. But for the most part, when you make a new track, it's just going to be a 2-channel track by default, meaning that it will accommodate both mono and stereo material. If you drag in a new file into Reaper, it'll make a track. It'll make a track for that file with that file's name. So when I dropped in the test voice file, the name of the track is now test voice and test music. And also, interestingly, if I move this to a new track, it makes a new track automatically. Just that's an interesting thing about how it works. In Reaper speak, there's some sort of language conversion things between Reaper and Pro Tools. So in Pro Tools, if you're an old Pro Tools user, you might call them regions. And now it's called clips in Pro Tools. Like this would be a clip. In Reaper speak, this is called an item. And the reason that that difference is important is eventually we are going to learn how key commands do different functions to items. And when you are doing searches for these functions, you want to just know that you want to use the word item instead of clip. So these are all items. And double clicking on any item will give you this properties window, which does some interesting things. It's basically all the information about that particular audio file in time and space, like its position, its length, whether it has a fade or not. But the thing that you'll probably most often use this properties window for is if you double click something, you have what they call the take name. And so, I can say this is Brendan's voice. And so I've used this feature in all sorts of different, if I can type, all sorts of different ways over the years. Sometimes I've used this actually to kind of log tape, or just to identify different pieces of music, to rename takes. But if you're looking to name your takes for organizational purposes, this is how you do it. And I've set this whole system up to sort of mimic the way that Pro Tools works, in the sense that you've got your arrange view right here to arrange your audio files. On the side, you've got a tracks list, which you can turn on and off. You can color them different ways too, by clicking up here. And then on the side, I have this, what they call the media, what do they call it? They call it the project bay, the project media and effects bay, which has a bunch of tabs on the side. And the second tab is sort of like your clips list in Pro Tools. So, and I'm going to go over this slower in a moment, but if I make a bunch of cuts to an audio file, you can see I'm getting clips on the side. And this works very similarly to the way that Pro Tools clips list works. Other basic things about Reaper's sort of just from a layout perspective, all of these different panels can be turned on and off. And they have different sort of tabs, so you can close them and open them, or you can also modularly move them around. So like I can take this tab and slide it over here and kind of customize the interface to, however I see fit. And again, I'm setting this up in a way that most closely mimics a Pro Tools setup. Similarly to the Pro Tools setup, at the very top here, there's a navigator, which you can expand and shrink or hide if you don't like it. But this is sort of like a map of your entire project. So just to give you a sense, for a really big project, this is what a map can look like. This is an episode from the Wolverine podcast. And this has like hundreds of tracks, but the navigator is a nice way of being able to navigate around your project. Another thing that I do very often when I've got a big project is like selecting all. Oh, this is a really big project, so select all might take a while. I should have thought about that. Select all. And then in Pro Tools, what you do to zoom to a specific region is hit the E key. And by hitting E, it will shrink my entire arrangement to, or zoom rather, my entire arrangement to whatever I've selected. So that's on a really big project, but on a small project, like our setting right here, maybe you want to just zoom in on an individual part of sound, an individual item, and the E key will let you sort of power zoom in, and then you hit it again and toggles out. So that can be really nice. And then also if you're selecting a group of things, zoom into that group. You can be across tracks, zoom into that group. So that's nice. Okay, talked about properties, talked about the modular panels. The keystroke shortcuts for that, again, are the E key. So QWE, E is the key that I'm typing. What about the mixed window plugin chain? Great question. So I've set this up the same way as Pro Tools, which is Command E, or this is going to be for Windows users. Whenever I say Command, it's Control E, or sorry, not E, Control equals. Control equals or Command equals will bring up the mixer window down here. And you can toggle that with the same key command, turning it on and off. And right now, this sort of goes back to Reaper's modular design. I have the mixer window docked, meaning it's part of the interface, but I can right-click where it says mixer right here and undock it. And this is sort of more how Pro Tools is, where you've got a floating mixer and then a separate arrange window. So you can do it both ways. The key command again is Command, or that's the Apple key, Command equals. Also Command M, I have that one set up. Both of those key commands both work. Where has mute solo gone? Well, the mute and solo are on the mixer right here. And if you expand this out, oh, that's weird. Mute and solo is there, but I'm going to have to punt on that question because there's a... On this side, this is one of the... This is true of Pro Tools as well, that there's like a representation of the same mixer that you've got here is replicated here on the tracks on the side. This is your fader. And then if you go to track layout, track panel, you can change the way that the tracks look. But this is getting a little bit deeper into the weeds than I wanted to go right now. But if you go to the one I just selected, track layout, track panel, no pan, no volume, now you've got your mute and solo there. So I don't know why that wasn't enabled by default. Again, you do that by right-clicking. Oh, so this is, I'm going to do this a lot. I'm going to be like, oh, and then there's this thing. Oh, and then there's this thing. One of the things I love about Reaper is that almost every aspect of its interface is right-clickable. So if you ever like are trying to figure out how to do something or want more options to do something, do your secondary click or right-click, and all of a sudden you get this a whole bunch of extra options. And sometimes it takes a minute. It can there can be a lot of them sometimes, but very often you'll find the thing you're looking for when you right click. People in the chat are talking about the action window, and I would love to talk about the action window, but I'm not quite there yet. Let me first talk about the basic navigation controls, and then I'm going to talk about the action list. So just hang tight. Okay. So let's talk about just getting around Reaper, navigating, zooming. I have it set up with the same Pro Tools key commands. So R and T will zoom in and out. Also, Command open bracket and Command close bracket will zoom in and out as well for people who have been on Pro Tools for years. My whole sort of philosophy behind, and I think this is borrowed from Pro Tools actually, is I like to be able to have one hand on the keyboard and one hand on the mouse, and to be able to do a lot of my commands using a single hand. So a lot of these key commands are going to be on the left-hand side of the keyboard. So R and T for zooming in and out. And then this is something that I've added because I like it, but it's not Pro Tools based, is above R and T are the 4 and 5 keys. And they zoom in and out the same way, but vertically. So between those two keys, you can do all of it. Now, does that make sense? You've almost got like a little arrow pad like that. But my favorite way of doing it is holding down the command key, or in the case of Windows users, control key, and then scrolling with my mouse. And if you've got a mouse that has both axes to scroll, you can work that way. So this is really helpful for big projects. I can very quickly, well, as quick as it'll load this project, I've got to not do this, not go to the huge one. I can very quickly find where I'm looking for by both pointing my mouse where I want to go and then zooming in and out by holding down the command key and then scrolling. I'm going to do this in a little bit smaller of a project, like that. So the key commands are there if that's your jam, and if you want to try the scrolly way, that's how I prefer to do it. And also, I know that people have strong opinions about the direction of scrolling, like do you scroll this way or that way, and how does your mouse respond? That's all customizable in the settings, and I'm not going to show that right now, but I want you to know that it's possible to configure it exactly the way that you want it for yourself. Okay. What is next? That's basic zooming in and out. Let's talk about some of the basic editing stuff. So I'm going to go to our very simple example audio here. Now, for those of you who have used Pro Tools, you're probably aware that you switch between the grabber tool and the selector tool, or some of you use the multi-tool. And Reaper is like being in the multi-tool all the time. And for some Pro Toolers, that might sound maddening. But because in Pro Tools, I hate the multi-tool. It never works quite the way I want it to. And I don't know how to describe it, but it works in Reaper in a way that is way more intuitive for me. Like when I mouse over the thing, it's changing in the way that I want to change, even when I'm zoomed up super close on an edit point. Let's just talk about the basics of how this multi-tool works. When you click on an item, if you go to the top corner, you can make a fade like that. Same thing on the other side. You can also right-click on that fade and change its different shape. By default, I'm using these sort of S-like fades because they tend to work for the material that I use most consistently, but you can also configure it if you want to have the linear fades always. You can set it up that way. So that's from the top corner. From the bottom corner, this is like your trim in Pro Tools. So that's moving the endpoint of a region one way or the other. And then on the body of the item, if you are on the top half of the region, it's going to create a selection like this, which is pretty similar to how Pro Tools does it. This is all stuff that I've customized specifically. Reaper doesn't work like this out of the box, but this is how I've got it set up so it's more cross-compatible with Pro Tools. And then in the bottom, that's how you move things. So if you're ever having trouble moving things, or you're getting a selection when you don't intend to, that's what's up. You want to be able to pick from the top or the bottom. Now, when it comes to editing, some people like to think of it as linear tape, and they'll like highlight a selection and delete it. And you can do that. I just did that by hitting the delete key. The The way that I tend to work personally is with edit points. I like to think about my regions having like in and out points. So I'll usually make cuts like that and then delete the thing that I want. But to each their own. But how do you make those cuts? Well, it's the same as in Pro Tools in the sense that if you do Command E or Control E, that will make a slice. However, if you are a Pro Tools user, you know that also the B key is supposed to do that in Pro Tools. And I do have the B key set up to make cuts. However, I've done something a little bit tricky and different, which is what I call the floating edit. So traditionally in Pro Tools and in most audio editors, what you have to do is make your edit point. So this red line, that's your edit cursor, and then Control E, and that makes a cut. In order to speed things up, I've made this hover edit, which allows you to not ever click, but just take your mouse and then hit the B key, B as in boy, and it will make a cut wherever you have your mouse. So there's a little bit of a distinction, and these are things that you can also customize in your own way if you want to, and I'll show you a little bit more about how you do that later on. But this whole philosophy, the hover philosophy, is something that I implement in a few different areas. So I'm going to undo a bunch of these cuts that I just did. Actually, I'm not even going to undo it. I'm going to delete all this stuff, and then I'm going to stretch this back out to where it was. You might have just seen something just there as I stretched it out, which this is another thing that I really love about Reaper. Let's say I've made a cut right here. By default, in this profile, I have auto crossfade turned on. And what that means is I can take an item and drag it into the next item, and it automatically crossfades. And this one thing alone makes people's editing so much better, so much better. Like these little clicks and pops and stuff like that, that a lot of folks get when they're just starting to edit. You can solve a lot of that by either crossfading or nudging a region into the next I called it region, items into each other, or by using the trim tool and stretching them out so they cross over each other. Can you do mass crossfades from Pro Tools way of selecting everything? Command F. It works a little bit differently. There is a Command F, I believe. Is there, Brendan? No, Command F is a find feature, which so this is going to come up a lot. I've got mine. This is like peering into my mind, but F works. Jeremy's right. The Command F is a find search. So if I labeled my tape with a bunch of or like sort of logging it, this is how you can find things. So you can do a search for the log or the tape that you're looking for. So that's kind of getting ahead of things, but you can search for item names, you can search for media file names, you can search for all sorts of stuff. Okay. What's next? Let's talk about more fades. So for Power Pro Tools users, they often use the A, S, D, and G keys for cutting the sides of an item and for creating fades. So A meaning it's cutting from the end of an item to the cursor, and S does the same thing, but from the other end of the item. Similarly with the D and G keys is a way of doing that as a fade. But you'll notice that I've got the hover thing turned on for all of that. So I'm not, now you can click and do that kind of edit, but you don't have to click. So in my opinion, it goes a lot faster. Let's see. I'm curious if there's a way to have one item just override another when pushing it into another as Pro Tools. Yes, there is a way of doing that. And this is usually the answer in Reaper is like, yes, there is a way. The first thing to do is to turn auto crossfade off. So, I haven't even talked about all of this stuff up here yet. That should be my next stop on the tour. Right up here is your auto crossfade. You can turn it off. And then in this case, it's working in a slightly different way. But if you right click, you can change your options. So you can say trim content behind media items when editing. So that will do what you're expecting, Catherine. So you can do all of this, basically. Yes, and. I personally think it's better to have it on for my workflow and also for new users because of that auto crossfade thing. And by the way, that auto crossfade thing works even if you, this is the way I've set it up, even if you're doing a cut right here, if you zoom in, it's creating a tiny auto crossfade by default. So, so that way, even if you're making cuts, it's sort of an extra safety measure to make sure that you're not going to get weird, clips. All right, I told you that I was going to talk about this up here. So these are this toolbar up here. It does some basic stuff. If you mouse over it, it'll give you a little hint of what it's doing. So new project, open project, save project, project settings. We'll get to that later. Undo, reverse undo, metronome if you're doing anything that's tied to the grid. This is the auto crossfade, which again I suggest make sure that envelope points 1 is clicked in. Yes, I'm getting yes, that's a very important point. Okay, so getting there. This is item grouping, which if you want to group things together, like this is a piece of music, let's say, and I want to sort of group these things together, it's Command G, and then I can move things around together, and then Command U to undo it. That should be like Pro Tools. But if this thing is turned off and you do a Command G, oh, come on, Brendan. It doesn't work. So this is like your overall groups are turned on or they're turned off. And for my workflow, I want them always turned on. Oh, sorry, Rose. I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to like it a lot. Okay. Now, this next one is super important, and I want to skip it for a moment because I want to spend some more time on it. So I'll come back to that one. This one right here is automation follows edit. And this is sort of similar to Pro Tools for anyone who has done a lot of volume automation. What you want to make sure is, I'm going to turn these groups off. If you move a region, that the volume automation that you've drawn beneath it moves with it. However, if you turn this off, it slips away. And there are different scenarios where you'd want to do this, but I'm going to say probably 90% of the time you want to make sure this is turned on. And I can't tell you how many times I've like accidentally turned it off and like moved my automation around, and it's a nightmare. So I strongly recommend keeping it on whenever you're working, unless you're very specifically trying to keep a perfect curve that you made and you want to move a region relative to that curve. So like an example of that would be, I made this like beautiful curve or whatever, and now I want to nudge this piece of sound onto it. But let's keep it on. I'm going to talk more about automation in a minute, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. This next one is the grid, which if you're doing anything with music, that is, how you turn it on or off, but I've got it turned off by default. Alice points out the shadow beneath the automation line. That is something just to be aware of. That's very nice, so you can see the relationship between your automation and your audio. This next one is the snap feature. So do regions snap to each other or not? This works slightly differently when the grid is on. When you've got the grid turned on, it'll snap to the grid. However, when you've got it turned off, it actually does some other kind of cool snapping things. So, and this is something that you have to get a feel for on your own. But if you push things together, there's a moment where they start to snap together. And I find this super helpful. So I recommend keeping this on all the time, unless you're doing something that where a snap is annoying for whatever reason. But 90% of the time, I think it makes sense to have it on. And there are all sorts of things that are snappable. So you can also change the way it snaps. So if you right click on this, oh, this is actually something I'd like to update the next time I do this. I like it so it snaps on both ends of the region, so it's not just the start. This is better for my workflow, personally. But then there are other cool things, like let's say you make a marker, like edit here. Let's put this marker here. You can actually have things snap to the marker, which when you're doing a big project and having to line up a bunch of things, is super nice. Another amazing thing that I wish every audio program did, notice how, let's just make a bunch of tracks here. Let's just say I've got a bunch of music. Notice how if I've got a chunk of sound and I'm moving it around, there are guidelines both horizontally and vertically, so I can compare to everything else that's around and like have these super precise measurements. That is a effing game changer for me. Like when they introduced that, it made my life so much better. I know I'm doing some things that I haven't talked about, like making markers. The command for marker in this profile is Shift M. Yeah, Shift M. But let me continue on this tour. Okay, so we talked about snapping, locking on or off. Similar to how the groups, you can have groups turned on or off. You can lock individual pieces of audio with Command L so they won't move. And this is how you turn them on and off globally. And then these last ones are ones that I added. So this is a notepad. And this is where some of the really amazing radio functionality can come in. You can leave notes on everything. You can leave notes on the project. So this is just, I can say, like, if I'm collaborating with someone, I can say, hey, I was just, whatever, I was working on the session, I noticed these things. I have a to-do list and XYZ thing that I want to do. And they'll have that, whenever then it'll travel with the project. But it's not just the project. You can also leave notes on items themselves. So I can say, like, this music sucks. If I can type, I feel like I'm a little dyslexic today. And then you'll have a little note icon on the item like that. So this is something that I haven't totally built into my everyday workflow, but it's something that I intend to. Like, I always, whenever I start a new project, I'm like, oh, there's got to be a way I can fold that in. For now, they're kind of like notes to self, for what's the way I use them. But they can be very helpful. Notes on everything. The shortcut for notes, there is one. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's just this panel up here. I'll show you how to look up shortcuts in a moment. Excuse me. Okay, and this last one right here is the master fader, which I sometimes like having the master fader just like present for my own workflow. It's kind of nice to see what the overall output levels are and stuff. Yeah, I'm going to delete it because I've got copies of this music, but so that's how you turn the master fader on or off separately from the mixer. However, when you open up the mixer, you can, you can right click and decide whether you want the mixer, like where you want the mixer to show or the master fader to show up. So it's all super customizable. Sometimes I want it down there. Sometimes I want it up in the region. The reason I like it up here, though, is I've got, and this is for the audio engineers out there, I've got this configured as both a peak meter and a slow RMS meter. And the slow RMS meter is basically set up to replicate LUFS. So the inside is the peak level, like you'd get on a normal Pro Tools fader. And then the outside is basically equivalent, mostly equivalent to its LUFS level. So it's a way of seeing if my loudness is in spec or not. Alrighty. I feel like the next step is... Oh, wait, I want to talk about slip and shuffle. Rose asks, how do you find that master? It's up here, this window. And then you can also right-click on it to sort of customize where you want it to show up. Or you can drag it around. You can make it its own window that floats around if you want. But that's how I do it. I like doing it that way because then I can like have these other pieces of information on the side, which I often use, and then toggle back and forth between them. How do you find the blue thing below the item? I don't know what the blue thing is referring to. How do you tab back and forward between clips? I don't know what the blue thing envelope. Let me get to the envelopes shortly because that's super important. The tab thing, I think there is a way to do this, but the tab between clips is not part of the Pro Tools workflow that I've kept. So that would be something that you'd have to kind of figure out on your own. I do have tab to transient turned on, so that works. How do you right click on Mac? You right click on Mac by holding down the command key or control key. What? Control, command? I thought it was command. You can also do on some machines, a double tap if you have a trackpad. You might have to set, that's going to be, what JS said, you're going to have to set that up in your system preferences. Thanks for the feedback, Megan. That makes sense up here, upper right, upper left. I'll try to be more specific. And I'm moving kind of fast, I realize. I'm like very caffeinated right now. All right. Let me take a minute to breathe and talk about slip and shuffle. So in Reaper speak, it's called ripple instead of shuffle, and it's on or off. And that's what the second panel up here in the control option panel thing, control bar, I guess you'd call it. The second from the bottom toolbar is how you turn slip and shuffle off, or I'm going to call it ripple. I'm going to be precise about this. And I'm going to show you how it works. When ripple is turned off, it's basically the same thing between... By the way, but if people have to leave, I just want to tell you something really quick. I don't want to... This is like getting ahead of everything, but there's an important thing I want you to have that I want to make sure that you don't miss. So I'm just going to take a moment to do this. If you go to File and Project Templates, you should find something called Brendan's Radio and Podcast Template. And that's going to open something up for you that'll look like this. And you can close that. And I'm not going to talk about this right now, but this is just for the folks that have to leave. This is like my shortcut mix template with a lot of built-in plugins and things kind of like pre-configured for general purpose radio making. And you've got various spaces to put different things, music, sound effects, actualities, studio tracks. And that's all I want to say about it right now, because this goes pretty deep. But I just want you to be aware about it. And this is like part of what I really want people to have. So yeah, that's there. But let's punt on that for now, and let's keep doing our lesson for the rest of you that are still with me. Okie doke. We were talking about ripple. So ripple turned off works the same way as slip works in Pro Tools. So right now, when it's this icon up here in the toolbar, when it's gray, it works just like you can move things around freely. Now, if you turn it on, there are two types of behaviors, and look at how the icon changes. Right now, there's sort of a row of boxes, and then if I click it again, all of these boxes are turned on, and they're different behaviors. So this first one where it's just the single row, what that means is it's rippling per track. So whatever you do on one track is not going to affect what happens on the other track. So when I move this item, you can see this one is moving along with it, which is kind of what you'd expect. And then you can, if snap is turned on, it'll like kind of nestle really close, and then if you push it past the snap, it'll crossfade. And that also affects how you edit too. So this is similar to how shuffle works. It's not quite the same, and once you get into it, you'll see some of the issues. One of the big issues is, let's say that this is an interview up here, this bit of audio, and you've got some music below it, and you start cutting. Obviously, you're changing the relationship between where this track fits and this track fits. So you want to make sure that you're only using the ripple per track in very specific features. Much more often, I'm using the ripple all command. And this ripple all command for me is one of the reasons why I can't go back to Pro Tools and feel good about it. This has changed the way that I edit, because especially when it comes to tracks that have a lot of stuff going on. So in this little session here, I've got some voices.
Now, is this...
And I've got some music, and I've got a bunch of sound design that I've like labored over. And if I make a change here, I want all this other stuff to stay, together with each other. So I pretty much only toggle between turning ripple off and ripple on completely. And I'm going to give you the key commands in a moment. But when ripple all is turned on, if I make an edit here, it edits the whole project. And in Pro Tools, that would be like a multi-step move. You would have to say, okay, I want to select all these tracks together. I want to select to the end of the session, and I want to make the edit, and I want it to all to fit together. And that can be anywhere from 2 to 3 moves. And this is a way of doing it in one move and keeping everything together. And basically what it means is it's treating your whole project as if it were a piece of tape. Like, so if you make an edit in one place, it's making an edit across the whole session. And, that does sometimes create certain issues with like music edits. So like if I were to make a cut here, you can see how now there's an edit under the music track. But there are various ways that I won't be able to get into right now, of kind of working with that. And actually, I would prefer that kind of a thing happening than I would having my sound design and my music and all the stuff that I like get out of order. So that's why I swear by basically going between ripple all and ripple off. And then the ripple track thing, I sometimes even turn it off, like disable it so I can't accidentally turn it on, because sometimes it causes problems for me. Can the partial ripple be applied to, say, 3 of the 8 selected tracks? That's a great question that I don't have the answer to, but I will bet money that the answer is yes, it's possible. I just don't know how to do it yet. All right. Let's talk about the key commands. So in Pro Tools, shuffle and slip are F1 and F2. So I've kind of replicated that here by doing F1, F2, and F3. Also 1, 2, and 3. I used to not use the F keys at all, so I added that recently sort of as a nod to the Pro Toolers. I used to just use the 1, 2, and 3 keys, but 1, F1, 2, F2, 3, F3. At the moment in this configuration, they all do the same things. They don't all do the same things, but they correspond to each other. Does that make sense? So 1 is ripple off. You can see how the icon changes. 2 is ripple per track. 3 is ripple all. And F1, F2, F3. Also, Option and P, if you hover over it, that's sort of the Reaper default, which I've left intact. It's Option P, or I think Option P, which in Windows is Alt P, that just toggles between the modes. So you can do it a number of ways.
Go over just the list of shortcuts you just mentioned one more time, like for toggling through all of those different functions.
To toggle through them, it's Option P or Alt P if you're on Windows. And then if you want to go exactly to a certain mode, the 1 key is ripple off, the 2 key is ripple per track, the 3 key is ripple all. And that's the same with F1, F2, and F3. So you're starting to see how like this side of the keyboard is getting filled up with different functions. And it really does kind of work where you can have one hand be on the mouse and the other hand be on the keyboard and do most of the things you want to do. Okay. I want to talk about volume automation and automation in general, but before I do that, I would like to talk about the action list because this is so central to what makes Reaper amazing. So the action list up here on the menu bar, show action list. Meaningfully, it's also the question mark key. So that is telling us something. If you ever have any questions, open up the action list. And what the action list is every command that is possible to do in Reaper, searchable, and their corresponding key commands. And you can approach it a couple different ways. You can either find a shortcut. So like, I haven't yet talked about the Q key, but if I hit Q, it will jump me down and tell me what Q does. So this is a way of teaching yourself how Reaper works over time. And as you might imagine, this is all totally customizable too. So like, as you start to make your own key commands, you can search them. But because you are now using my system in this configuration, if you want to understand something that I've set up, this is how you do it. The other way to go about it is, let's say like, man, I really wish I could make a key command that would, I don't know, like take my edit cursor to the end of an item. Okay, so then I can do a search for that up here in the filter and say, how would I say that? Item, cursor, and I can start to narrow down the number of options and see, well, what are the functions that are available? I can set the item to the end of the cursor. Okay, that's not quite what I want. Oh, here it is. Move cursor to the end of items. And I did that all just kind of like spitballing. I didn't know that was, I don't even know if that would be a useful function for some people, but this is what makes Reaper so powerful, is that it can do all of these very minute things, but here's the kick-ass thing. You can string them together and make your own combinations and teach it to do things that it wasn't originally designed to do, and make your own custom macros, basically. And some Pro Toolers use a third-party program to do something very similar to this. But a lot of my key commands are actually, if you get under the hood, they're actually custom commands that I built. So like that hover command that I talked about, the B key. So I'm going to do a find shortcut for the B key. That's actually a custom command that I built, which is a few different things strung together. And you can see what I did by clicking on the B key and go to edit action. And on this side, this gets super, I'm going like very scratching the surface here, but these are the 3 commands that I strung together to make that work. And then on this side, it's all of the possible things that you could do in Reaper. So you can do your search for like all the different things you want to do, and then you put them in order, and then you save them, you make a name for them, hit OK. And then down here, shortcut for selected action, you can assign something to it. So if I said, I actually want that to be H instead, okay, now it's B and H, and I can delete them or I can change them. So super powerful stuff. Alice asks, we're modifying your configuration at this point. Do we need to export and name this in order? You could. You can always just re-download the configuration file that I have. SoundFlow, I don't know what SoundFlow is, but maybe? If you see similar functionality to whatever SoundFlow is, then maybe yes. I I will say, Alex, just because I think you would appreciate this, one, it does have Sound Miner built in. If you go to view and sorry for everyone that I'm like doing this on top. It's called the where is it? Media Explorer. So this is all of my entire sound library, and I can search for, you know, everything that I've imported into it. So for people who are doing advanced sound design, this is super great because I've got my entire library with me. It's searchable. I can take portions of it and just drag and drop it into the, so like I can just do a search for, I don't know, water. What are some water sounds? Boat. And I have this all on an external hard drive. So this you don't have these sounds. That doesn't come with my Reaper configuration. That would be many gigabytes. But if you do sound design work, this is a very powerful tool. And you can have different databases for different sound libraries and stuff. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, but you can pitch and change the rate and do all this other stuff. Okay. We talked about the actions list. Let's talk about the volume automation, or automation in general, actually. And I'm going to go back to the little demo thing here. First of all, I'm just going to clear out this automation. Okay, so by default, the V, as in volume key, opens up the volume lane. Similarly, the P, as in pan key, opens up the pan lane, if you're doing panning things from left to right. And I have done my best to try to make what is, to me, the most intuitive way of working with automation, which borrows things from Ableton Live as well as Pro Tools. It's a little weird because Pro Tools has different tools for automation. You have to switch between those tools, and how automation responds depends on what tool you're selecting. I find this to be way more intuitive. So here's how I work with automation. By default, when you hit V, you're at 0 decibels, so it's just normal, nominal gain. And if you double click, it makes a point, or if you shift click, it makes a point. Those both work. You can drag points up and down. You can hold down the command key and draw, like so. One of my favorite things to do, though, I'm just going to hit select all and delete. By the way, I have to make sure I wasn't up in here when I hit select all, otherwise it's going to select the item and not the automation. Can someone explain the difference in the two windows between the example of the voice and the podcast setup? Oh, this is actually something I haven't said, which I've been doing in front of you and haven't talked about this whole time, which is amazing. Reaper has tabs, so I can tab between different projects. It's a great question, actually. So the template right now is in one tab. This sort of working space that I have, that's a totally different project, but I can have multiple projects open at the same time. And the really amazing thing is, let's say I've got this template and I'm like, okay, I want to take all of these tracks, shift select them, copy them, go into this other project and paste them. And all of those settings and all those plugins came with. So this is sort of like what you do in Pro Tools with import session data, but I find this way more intuitive, faster, and it gets me what I want. So oftentimes when I'm working with other producers, what I'll have them do is kind of the opposite of what I just did. I'll have them make their edit here. So let's say that this is their perfectly edited piece of audio. And then I'll just have them give me their session, and I'll copy that track into a pre-existing thing that I have, paste it, make sure it's in the right spot, and now all of a sudden their edited piece is in my session. So if you're doing mastering, or if you're assembling pieces from different producers, this is a super powerful way of like letting them do their own thing in a more sort of restricted space, and then importing it very quickly into a project. Okay, where do I go from here, Brendan? We were talking about volume automation. CPU max tax for multiple tabs. Good question. There is a CPU meter at the bottom that sometimes pops up, you can also go to View and Performance Meter. And this is telling you how much it's taxing your computer. For having multiple tabs, I think it's maybe RAM based. So like, even though I have the Wolverine session in an open tab right now, it's not taking up a bunch of CPU until I actually go to it. And that's true for plugins as well, actually. When plugins are not getting, there's a setting that I've turned on by default where the plugins are only using CPU power when audio is going through them. And that's configurable for power users, but it's a way of making it so you can do really big things with a lot of plugins and not take up a ton of CPU power. So we were talking about automation. And apologies for everyone for, hopping across these ideas. There's like so much I want to share. I'm so excited to share it. And this is sort of how my brain works too. I hop around quite a bit. But now we're talking about volume automation. So clicking is a way of making points, also shift clicking. Double clicking is a way of deleting points, also option clicking. You can also select a point and just hit delete. But one of my favorite things, sometimes it feels right to draw like this. Sometimes that feels like the move. Sometimes what I want to do is like really rough things out. So a good example of this would be, I'm going to actually not do this on dialogue because right now I'm doing volume editing for a dialogue track. But more often than not, you'll be doing this kind of stuff on music tracks, right? So let's just delete these. I'm going to select all and zoom in. Select all, zoom in. So here's my music. Oops, turn that off. Here's my audio. And let's say I want the music to fade up, partway through. I'm not really being very thoughtful in how I do this, but I'm clicking on the music track. I'm hitting the V key to get volume. I'm going to zoom out so I can see more of it. Again, I'm zooming out by holding the command key and scrolling. So let's just say that I want the music to be at full volume as soon as the talking's over. I can't wait to show you this next step. I'm going to keep talking about volume since that's where I'm at, but I'm really excited to show you what's coming up. Okay, so this is maximum volume, and I know that I want it to start at nothing here. And so right now I've got this linear volume fade, and this is something that I've taken from Ableton. If you hold down Option, you can bend it. So rather than doing that drawing thing and making something that, this is sort of a way of being, having the perfect curve. And you can do exponential curves and you can do S curves and you can even right click on it and change the linear shape, whether you want it to be a slow start or fast start. So there are a lot of ways that you can tweak it just with a few points of automation rather than having to draw the S curve yourself. So that can be really handy. Since we're talking about automation for the power users, let me tell you how to work with automation for things other than volume and pan. I'm going to do this kind of quickly, but so if this is going past you, don't worry about it. But for power users, I want them to know about it. This icon right here, the one that's green with the little sort of, looks like automation actually. This will give you every automatable parameter for every plugin that's, well, for volume, pan, for all the basic track stuff, and then also every plugin on the channel. So in this demo piece, I've got some low pass and high pass filtering on the music track. This is, for power users, this is folder tracks and busing together, kind of like what Pro Tools just implemented, but Reaper has had this for a long time. The Q key shows all the automation for the whole project at once. That's just like my personal thing. It can get kind of overwhelming, but sometimes I just want to be able to like see what I've done. And so you can see I've done some automation here This is for the sound effects space. And I've done some, I thought I did some, I guess it's up here, some automation for the high and low pass filtering of the music tracks. And the way that you see that, apart from just looking at the automation with the Q key toggling it on and off, is clicking this panel. And then you can see the checkboxes of all the different things that I've automated. So in this case, this is the low pass filter frequency of an EQ, high pass. And for those of you who know what this is all about, you can kind of, you can see it. And hopefully that should make sense. But unfortunately, I shouldn't probably go much deeper than that in this workshop. But that's how you do it. You turn it all on and off there, or you can also, and this is probably important for everyone, clicking the effects box right here opens up all the different plugins that are being used. And they're, serial, so it starts on the top and works down. And basically you can click on, in this case, low pass filter frequency, and you can check out its automation. You can actually automate it based on the level of a signal. So I've done some of that in my template where there's some EQ ducking the music a bit. But again, that's sort of more of a power user feature. But you can have an LFO modulate stuff, so it can be like a modular synthesizer in some ways. It goes pretty deep. I've been using the word envelope, and envelope is automation. Automation and envelope, they're like the same thing. So when I hit the V volume key, I'm automating the envelope or automating the automation for volume. And I use those terms kind of interchangeably. Okay. I really want to show you this one thing. I know I'm hopping around here a bit, but I feel like I'm showing a lot, and there's like, I can go longer, but I do kind of want to check in with everyone. What about aux sends? That's a great question. Let's put a pin in that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. How do you get the boom mic image? That's an easy one. You right click on it, track icon, set track icon. I did that fast, but these are just sort of default images that Reaper has built in. And I don't normally do this. I actually made these for you specifically because I thought they were pretty. But yeah, that's why they're there. Just to make very clear that like this is an actuality track. This is a studio track. Okay, the thing that I want to talk about, which I think will be useful to everybody, both power users and non-power users alike, is loudness. So this is one of the reasons that I had you install the SWS extensions. What I do whenever I bring in a new piece of audio is the N key. The N key is automatic loudness normalization. So it's not normalization in the traditional sense where you're expanding the waveform to its maximum amount. What it's really doing is reading the loudness of that particular unit of sound and bringing up the gain or lowering the gain in order to make it hit a certain level. And in this case, that level for the engineers is negative 23 LUFS, or LU. It is LUFS, LU, because it's full scale. But so I've designed the template that I've given everyone around the idea that all voice levels should be trying to reach a negative 23 loudness unit target. And then at the mastering stage on the master fader, then we bring up the overall project level to like negative 18 LU, which is the spec that I think a lot of folks are mixing to these days. So this gets super powerful because, I've done workshops at like established radio operations where the practice is like going into the volume and adjusting, and seeing a bunch of automation points. And in my opinion, that is doing a lot of extra work that's not necessary. I mean, it's more necessary in Pro Tools because you don't have this feature in Pro Tools, but or you maybe can do it with some third-party stuff. But you can also make cuts and, moments that are a little bit quieter. You can select them all at once, hit normalize, and it will balance them in relationship to each other. That's super powerful. It can also cause problems. Let's say you have something that's basically just room tone and you normalize that. It's going to normalize the room tone and it's going to sound like noise. So you want to be careful about it. So that's why I think the best practice is when you've got a whole file, run the loudness normalization once. That way you know what the units are for that whole file. And then from there, if there's like a moment that's a little bit quieter, then you can go and run it again if you want, or make a manual adjustment with clip gain. I haven't talked about clip gain yet. You can nudge the volume up and down with the Command Shift up and down keys, which is the same as Pro Tools. And this isn't destructive. It's actually in the order of operations of volume. Does that make sense to everyone? Like the thing that happens first to an audio file is the clip gain is getting modified up or down. Then that audio is going through the plugin chain. Then it goes through the volume after that. So if you're adjusting volume here, you're actually adjusting it after the plugins have done their work. And the nice thing about this is that you're adjusting it before the plugins have done their work. So if you're using compressors, stuff like that, you can get things basically kind of in the ballpark same level, and then have them run through noise reduction compressors, whatever you want. And so my philosophy for mixing is to do all of the technical volume changes at the clip gain level, or at the item level. So I make all of my adjustments here by using the Control Shift up and down key. I can also reset that with Control arrow key that way. That's the right key. So Control Shift right will reset it. But then Control Shift up and down will change the level. So yeah, I tell people to do all of your technical volume changes up here, then let it run through the plugins, and then think about this volume more as your creative volume, changing the relationships or the balance between things. But this normalization thing, which again it's just the N key, by itself, is really handy also for music, because if I run the normalization on a music track, so this is what the music track looked like beforehand. So it was much louder. And then I run it, and now I know that when the music is in the clear, when there's no voice competing with it, it is at the same volume level as the voices. So creatively, I know that my mix work has to be kind of subtractive in relationship to, so I'm going to duck the volume down until the voice stops any glitches or pops, and that it sounds like smooth, clear audio. And then the volume comes up, and now I know that the volume is, or the loudness is the same loudness as the voice. So that can be a really handy reference. And then obviously, like, use your ears if it's too quiet or too loud, depending on the music track. Sometimes if it has more drums or more transients or is ambient or whatever, loudness will feel somewhat differently. But the clip gain line, yes, there is a way to do the clip gain line like in Pro Tools, and this gets into something else that's pretty cool. So in my Reaper language, the and shift key command tends to do things on items. This will make sense in a moment. If V opens up the volume for a track, shift V opens up the volume for an item. And this is super nice because when you change, it can be selective for any number of items, but also the waveform changes in response. So you can get a sense of how things are, changing. And again, this sort of ties into this idea of do your technical mixing up here and do your creative mixing down here. And that way, you know how to get, you can make it sound nice, and then you can change how you want it to, how balanced you want it to be to other elements. And then the interesting thing about this is, unlike the clip gain line in Pro Tools, where if you hide it, it's still in effect. This is like a toggle. So if you do Shift V, now it's off, now it's on, now it's off, now it's on. So it's pretty obvious where this kind of stuff is being used and where it's not. For the power users, this gets extra deep because the same way that you can apply effects on a track, Shift E will open up an effects window just for a specific item. So I can apply whatever effects, any third-party effects, EQ, whatever. So let's just do something super basic. Let's do it on the music track, actually. Right now on this music track, I don't have any plugins. It's empty. But I can do Shift E on the music item. And I'm doing it on music because I more often do this type of thing on music tracks. And I'm just going to use the normal Reaper EQ, the stock one, the Re-EQ. Oh, by the way, I didn't talk about that. Searching for plugins. I've got a lot of plugins. Hit add. These are all the plugins that I have. And I can search for them. So I can say I want an EQ, and then it's going to narrow down the list to all of the different EQs that I've got. They've also developed categories, so you can put them in dynamics, EQ. You can sort of do it that way as well. But for my money, I think I mostly just know what I want. So if I want to use, dialogue denoiser, I can type in the word dialogue, and then I can see, the different plugins that I've got installed. But what I was going to show was this REEQ. So I'm just going to take something super simple, just an EQ. And I'm not putting it on the track. I'm putting it on the item. So this kind of works the way Audio Suite works in Pro Tools, except Audio Suite is destructive and this isn't. So, and this is also automatable. So let's say I want to do a low pass, and again, apologies to the non-engineers, but a low pass filter automation on a music item. I can do that. How would I do this? Similarly, how you turn on automation here, the key command is Command Shift E. So Shift E opens up the plugin window. Command Shift E opens up the automation for items. So then I can automate the frequency of the low pass filter. And I can draw that on the item the same way as I would use an envelope anywhere else. I can modify it however I want. And then just going to solo this. Actually, let's make it faster so people can hear the effect. So you can do a lot of sound design creation that way. So I'm just sweeping out the high frequencies. Very cool. And yeah, I do sometimes use that specifically for problem areas if there's like de-essing or like just one clip of audio that like sometimes I'll do a denoiser just on a specific clip because I don't want to apply it to the whole track. And that can be really handy. All right. Let me just consult my notes here really quickly. Thanks for everyone who's still with me. I hope this has been useful. There's more I would love to talk about. I do want to talk about the template a little bit. Are you going to have a second to talk about how you organize files? We're seeing peak files. Yeah, that's important. Okay. So by default, I actually don't like Reaper's organization process, and I've tried to do my best to mimic the way Pro Tools does it. So I've got some demo projects here. These are the intros of a couple Love and Radio pieces from years ago. I don't know why it's recalculating the peaks every time I open it. That's strange. I'm going to have to look into that. But let me show you what that session looks like file structure-wise. So this is from a piece with Shruti Penamaneni, who's now on Reply All, called Greetings from Coney Island. And so the folder itself, kind of like Pro Tools, the RPP file is the session file itself. And then there's a backups file. So I have it set to auto backup every 5 minutes. So that saves my ass all the time. Reaper doesn't tend to crash often, but when it does crash, it's usually because of a third-party plugin or some sort of weird incompatibility. And that happened a lot on the Wolverine project because I was using a lot of third-party plugins. And so the auto backups, as I'm sure anyone has had the misfortune of having something crash, they're very handy. So I have it set to auto backup every 5 minutes, but that's only when you're working in the project. So as you can see, I've got a bunch of backups here, but I've had this session open the whole time, but I haven't done anything into it. So it's not auto backing up when I'm not working in it. So that's nice. They do add up over time. I'll talk more about the Reaper stock plugins in a minute, but please remind me. But audio files folder should work essentially the same way as Pro Tools does it. That's an extra thing that I've configured. But, well, actually, no, this is important. So in this sort of demo thing that I've made where I just dragged and dropped audio directly into it, I haven't saved it yet. So right now, this project is referencing files that are in my downloads directory. They're not in any sort of, they're not, like in Pro Tools, you have to save the session and then before you even start. And then anything that you put into the session is copied automatically into Pro Tools, or at least that's how it's done by default. Here, it's much more like I can take audio from wherever, and it won't get saved in any spot until I tell it to. So when I save a project, in this case, I'm going to do save as. Wait for my computer to catch up. Wow, what's going on? I think it's reading an external hard drive. Okay, so let's say I'm gonna save it to my desktop, and this is just gonna be like demo stuff. At the bottom here, we have some options. Create a new subdirectory for project, copy all media into project, or move all media into project. And for anyone who's done file management, you know that this can be helpful and also dangerous. So by default, it's copy. So every time I save a new project for the first time, it will make a copy of those sessions into that wherever I'm saving. There are some times where I know exactly what's in the thing and I want to move it, and I'm cool with that. But just be careful with this. So this is going to make a new directory, 1. 2, it's going to copy these files into that new directory. So hit save. It moves the stuff over. It puts the peak files there. And then now on my desktop where I saved it, I've got my demo stuff folder with an audio files folder, the peaks information in a separate folder so it doesn't clutter up your, audio, and then the 2 files that I used in the session. So that's really helpful. And this is, I can hate on Pro Tools in a number of ways, but one of the things that I find really hard, especially for collaborating with Pro Tools sometimes, is not having things link up, audio files not linking up. And Reaper does that in a way that I think is less problematic. I actually talked to some folks about like why Pro Tools does it the way it does. Pro Tools is actually like writing metadata about the files whenever it's importing stuff. So it's like got all this extra information, which makes it really hard when if something's out of alignment, if something goes wrong, or if it's moving from one section to another, or for one computer to another, it doesn't always, but it can cause problems. And when it does cause problems, it's a pain to try to do all that relinking. Whereas let's say I deleted these files. They're not there anymore. I'm going to close the session because I saved it. Now, if I open that session again, it should probably say, hey, those files are missing. This beach balling is because of stupid Wolverine. Okay. Open project, desktop, demo stuff. Oh, that's not what I expected at all. Oh, wait, here we go. Okay, replace missing file. So it's looking for the files. It can't find the files. I happen to know that those files are in a different spot, and all I have to do is tell it to search where I know they are in my downloads directory. Oh, I guess I think I actually did copy them, so they're not on my computer anymore. If they were there, if I re-downloaded them, man, I thought this was going to be so cool. Stand by. Okay, so I'm going to re-download those files on my other screen that you can't see. Downloading that one. Downloading that one. Okay, so I'm just going to tell it to search in that directory. It finds them, it recalculates it, and they're all there. So it's quite nice. Another thing that I sometimes do, I used to do this more when online collaboration was a more difficult thing. I used to like work with producers using MP3 audio with the idea that eventually we would reconnect the full quality wave audio. So I'd have them make MP3s so we can send stuff back and forth online quicker. But then at the end, I want to reconnect the actual wave file. So to do that, it's super easy in Reaper. Choose new file, and then I can point it to the wave version, which is not here. I thought it was here, but it's not. You can also just have it go to a different file, which will cause problems, but can be fun for sound design stuff sometimes. It's just super easy to basically say, like, instead of looking at this file, look at this file instead. And for people who know how to code, you can actually even open up the RPP session, because it's just XML, and you can find and replace MP3 with wave, and it will just work. So that's cool. All right, that was pretty in the weeds, though. What I really want to do, I think, next, I think I want to check in and ask any questions. I want to look at the chat. If anyone has a pressing question, feel free to unmute yourself or ask it. But the next thing after this, I'm going to give a little tour of the template. Okay, Alice, I think I can get all of those when we talk about the template. I'll show you where I'll do all of this in the template, actually. Quick answer to the AAF files is no. It does not import AAF files. You have to use a third-party plugin program to do that. Which this is kind of like why I'm actually doing this. On Twitter, as I was preparing for this and going on a rant about Pro Tools and stuff, there are a lot of people making the totally valid point that, well, so I got this project in Reaper, but now I can't import it into Pro Tools. And that's true. And that's true of a lot of audio software. You can use this third-party program called AA Translator, which is a couple $100, and it works, but it works with the same caveats that an AAF and OMF file would have doing that kind of stuff. So it can be hard sometimes. And I really think in my bones, in my heart, that if you start a project in a program like Reaper, you should stay in Reaper. And I would love to see more people working in Reaper and also working with engineers and giving this kind of a session to the power user engineers so they feel empowered and comfortable to open up other people's stuff and not have to take it into Pro Tools, because all your plugins are there. Like, you can still use third-party plugins. You can do a lot of other stuff faster, in my opinion. And a lot of the muscle memory can be kept in place. And then you can also add. You can keep building things as you need them, if you are so inclined. I would like to, and like this thing that I'm sharing is kind of the result of many years of trying to have this kind of moment where I could show this to a Pro Tools engineer and be like, you can do all these things and your navigation's in place, and like you don't have to feel like a fish out of water. And so I'm hoping to kind of approach it from both ends. But I would love it if Reaper natively incorporated AAF and OMF, and I think there might be like some license reasons that they don't do that, but I don't actually know. Yeah, I do use Reaper for sound picture editing sometimes. You might not believe this. You can also do video editing in Reaper. This is a relatively new feature, but you can do basic video editing in the same way with the same approach to file management and, cutting things up and stuff. It's not going to win over any Final Cut users, that's for sure, or Premiere users. But for doing the picture, yeah, it's as easy as dropping the video onto a track, and then there's a video panel somewhere here. And it works basically the same way as it works in Pro Tools. In Pro Tools, you can associate with a reference video. Yes, you do that here. It's like its own video window. And I have actually all this stuff right here is when I was doing the Wolverine project, VR video stuff. So like these were different characters and we moved them around and I have to clear that out. Yeah, Reaper, because Reaper does multi-channel audio and ambisonics and stuff, it's really helpful for folks who want to get into that VR audio world as well, because you can do everything and not use Pro Tools Ultimate. All right, so let's talk about the template, and then I'll try to get to those questions about buses and auxes and stock plugins and stuff. Okay, so if you want to follow along here, I think I had you do this earlier, but you can go to File and Project Template and Brendan's Radio and Podcast Template, and that will open. I'm just going to do that with you. Got a little welcome message from me, which you can close that if you don't want to keep seeing that, but I like to keep it on, because that's also a good way if you're collaborating with someone for them to get a message for the first thing they open up a session. So let me give you a little tour of this and talk a little bit about the philosophy behind it. And yeah, so this uses entirely stock plugins except for the Ulean loudness meter. I'm going to get to that probably last. The loudness meter is on the master channel, master fader. But I think what I'll do is just talk about the sort of structure of this template, and then I'll show you how it works. I'm going to go through the structure first and the plugins, and then I'll show you how it works in a session. So I'm using these folders, and you can collapse these folders, by the way, so you can not see all of them. That's up right where my mouse is here. You can kind of shrink them down into nothing if you want, but I normally just keep them open. So these are, if anyone's used the most recent version of Pro Tools 12, they're like routing folders. They are not quite like just the organizational folders. So this is both doing busing and organization at the same time. So each one of these is a track, and they're just normal tracks. And in fact, if I make some new tracks, like so, and drag them to the bottom, these are all just blank tracks. I can make all of these tracks routed to this one. We call them parent and child tracks. So this is the parent track. These are the child tracks. And all the child tracks are routed into the parent track. And it's as simple as dragging and dropping and pushing them sort of underneath. And you see it sort of indents like that. And the cool thing about this is you can have tracks within tracks. And a lot of my sound design is sort of based on that idea that you're creating worlds within worlds, or, you know, universes of different zones of sound and trying to replicate the way sound works in real life, but doing it digitally. So that's sort of the very user-friendly way of doing it. There is a more advanced way of doing it, and that's what these panels are on each track right here. So, and this gets into the aux question. So let's say this is a music track. Wow, I'm really not spelling well today. And let's make a reverb track, and we want to aux the reverb to, hitting the wrong key commands. Reverb. Without doing any of this sort of indentation or folder business, we can click on the music track properties, and we can see the sends and receives, which right now there are no tracks being sent or received. But we can say, let's send the music track to the reverb track that we just made. And then we get a fader here. This is your aux send. You can see it here, and then you can also see it the same way that we see other automation by clicking the automation and then send volume down here. And apologies to everyone who this is kind of like a little bit engineering, but we're getting into that portion of the day. So you can automate it the same way as you'd automate anything, obviously. The cool thing about this is you can do it both ways. Like, if I didn't have that send created, I could also go into the reverb track and say, oh, it's still there, I gotta delete it. I can go to the reverb track and say, I want it to receive from another track. So you can kind of approach it from both angles, which I find super helpful. So receive from the music track, and it works the same way. And it just looks different depending on your perspective, basically. But it's the same connection regardless. So that's auxes. And let me do a rundown of the signal flow. By the way, this is something I haven't actually played around with yet, because I just haven't needed to. I'm going to remove these tracks. If you go to view track wiring, you actually kind of get this modular overview of your whole session, and you can route things that way too. So as with a lot of things in Reaper, there's sort of a yes and, like, you can do it from the panel, you can do it from the wiring diagram, you can do it from a routing matrix. So, like, however your mind works, it allows you to think about things in very different ways depending on what sort of school or philosophy you're coming from. But I'm going to do it the way that I think most people, I'm going to talk about this the way I think most people understand it, which is, okay, so I've got these child tracks going into parent tracks. I have different zones that are color coded for different regions, and the zones are studio, actuality, music, sound effects, and then this green track for pre-mastered material. That's like if you've got a clip from another show that's already been mixed and you don't want it to go through any compression or limiting, you just want it, and you know it's already at the right levels and stuff, you can put it there and it's safe. In the studio track, the studio and the actuality tracks are configured right now rather similarly to each other, but the big difference is that on the studio tracks, I use some gentle gating that is turning down the signal a little bit when no one's speaking. It's actually not a gate, it's a downward expander, and I'll show that to you in a moment. So I'm going to actually, before starting on the studio bus, I'm just going to show you the tracks, the studio tracks themselves. So this is the plugin chain that I have on the Studio 1 and Studio 2 tracks. And this is using all stock Reaper plugins. By default, I think Reaper stock plugins are fine. I use the EQ and compression all the time. I don't think that they're the most intuitive. I think they're actually not super intuitive when it comes to, isotope stuff. I think I'm a big isotope fan, especially for the noise reduction. But the very first track here is sort of Reaper's equivalent of noise reduction. The effect is called REAPER. And by the way, if you want to look at any of these, you click on the FX box on the plugin, and then you can hit Add. And these are all of your different, I have to clear my filter, but all the different plugins that you have. And then by default, the CocOS, I don't know how Reaper pronounces it, but that's the company that makes Reaper. These are all their stock plugins here. And then they also have these are things that other people have made that Reaper has incorporated over time, the JS effects. And they're often somewhat more basic, but some of them do esoteric, weird things. And they're there if you want to explore them. But the main stock plugins are in here. There's one JS effect that I use in this plugin chain, and I'll show you why in a minute. So the FIR, that's like fast Fourier transformation. That's the plugin that we're using. And it allows you to set it up in a bunch of different ways that I don't have time to go into, but I have it in subtract mode. And what I'm doing basically, I'm going to do this as a demo through this other track, is I'm very similar to if anyone's used isotope denoiser. It's kind of like a poor person's version of that. I say poor person because it does not sound as good as isotope denoise, but it works in a pinch, and it's quite customizable as well. So so the process here is I play a little bit of room tone, and I'm just going to loop a bit of room tone. I reset this, and I hit automatically build noise profile. And so it learns the sound of the noise, the room tone. And then unclick it once I'm done after it's cycled a few times. And then
I've been traveling for work in the beginning, and there's this postcard, this random postcard, and she's like, we're looking at it, and it seems like it could be something.
So that's with it on. If I turn it off, you probably won't be able to hear a difference through Zoom.
I got a text message from my neighbor saying there's this postcard.
But, for anyone who's done noise reduction, you know that a little goes a long way. And if you can hear it working, it's too much. So there's that. Next in the chain is, actually, I'm just going to, because I can, I am going to do a version of what I showed you earlier, which is I'm going to take this whole sequence by itself. I'm going to copy it, and I am going to put it in the template. So that way we can hear it in a more sort of focused manner.
She's like, we're looking at it, and it seems like it could be something really important, but it's also really strange.
So after the noise reduction plugin, I have this, and by the way, you can turn the plugins and bypass them on and off with these checkboxes. I have the General Dynamics plugin, which is a compressor and expander for those engineers out there who are into that. And you can basically draw your own response curve. So I have it set up just by drawing it. You can, literally draw it and kind of make it do weird things if you want, and then change the attack and release and all that stuff. But I have it basically as soon as it starts to go below a certain point, it's turning down the volume a little bit. So that in conjunction with the denoiser makes for something that feels more like being in a studio. And the idea behind this is like, if you have tracks that were recorded in a studio, it'll go through this stuff and it'll sound fine. It won't hurt that stuff. But if you're in a room like I am, which I have a window right in front of me and I do have some room tone and room noise, this takes it from having like a decent mic in a semi-controlled room to having something that really feels much more like being in a controlled studio. And when I do professional templates for Pro Tools or using third-party plugins, which people hire me to do sometimes, I do a version of this, but with other expensive plugins. The better plugins sound better. Like there's a reason you get what you pay for in the plugin department often, not always, often. But these do a very good job. And for folks who are not engineers and just wanting to make stuff on their own, this will get them up to speed very, very fast. So noise reduction, then the gating, or it's really downward expansion. Then EQing. The EQing is super basic. I basically just have a high pass filter, so it's filtering out the rumbly stuff. But there are nodes there if you want to turn on various other parts of the EQ that you want to color. But by default, I have it pretty flat, with the thought that you'll do whatever feels right. And then I have a very gentle peak compressor at a ratio of 2:1 that's just getting like about 3 decibels of compression. So that's all happening per track. And then on the parent track, I have another compressor that is doing a slower RMS-based style compression. So those two things together are both helping level out the transients, but also on a more moment-to-moment basis, smoothing things out a bit. And different engineers are going to have different philosophies about this, but this is what is working for me right now. So the actuality bus is very similar, except you'll notice that I don't put plugins on the tracks themselves. I'm putting it all on the actuality. And this will change from project to project, but for like a general purpose template, my philosophy is let's make things sound the same. Let's try to make it, gel and be cohesive. So it's also got a noise reduction, which you can turn on or off. And I will say philosophically, I typically try not to use noise reduction on actualities. I kind of like to keep the sound truer to real life personally. And I also keep the gating off because there's no need to try to do gating on things that are clips that are sourced out in the world. I have some EQ that's a little bit more colored. I'm doing some low mid control and I'm doing some low passing at the very top and some high passing at the bottom that's a little bit more aggressive. And again, the philosophy is like, let's just get all this material to sit in the same space and work well together. And then rather than breaking up the compressors on 2 different tracks, I just do it all here. Oh, and then at the very end, I have this super subtle, you don't hear it unless you're listening in headphones and A being it wet and dry, but there's a little tiny micro reverb, which in my opinion takes it from being in your head to being like right like a few feet in front of you. That's what the image feels like to me. And that's kind of an esoteric thing, but that's sort of been like a signature of mine for a while. So it's the kind of thing where like it shouldn't affect your phase relationships. You shouldn't notice it. You should feel it more than anything. And And then this is some of the cool behind the scenes stuff. The music track. Let me take some music from this session. So I'm going to put this music onto one of the music tracks. And behind the scenes, what I'm doing is I am telling Reaper to modulate this node of equalization whenever someone's speaking, whether they're speaking in the studio bus or the actuality bus, and you can just watch it move.
Is sort of a polka dot cornflower blue background, and then it just says, "Greetings from Coney Island, New York."
So it's just there when someone's speaking, and then it sort of gently pulls away. And the idea behind that is it's reducing the competition between the vocal parts of frequencies and the musical parts of frequencies. And it's the kind of thing where, like, I don't want you to notice it when like the best uses, or in the best case scenario, you don't notice it. It's just like things feel like they're all in their own space. And then I do have a master limiter or a limiter on the top level of some of these bus tracks, with the theory that if you're exporting to stems or something like that, you want to make sure that you're not clipping ever. So it's a very, very light limiter that's just meant for protection, basically, because it doesn't actually matter if you're clipping across buses in terms of distortion, although certain plugins will distort with that behavior. The real clipping that you want to worry about is on the master fader. So that's why I have that. And then on this music track, I also, I believe, yes, have high and low pass filtering set up automatically. So they're just there. If you just, all you need to do is expand or stretch out the track, and you should be able to see these automation lanes for high and low pass filtering. So you can just take any old piece of music and start, if you're into that, if this is like a style that you like with your production, you can start doing that, and
it's this amazing sort of
music accordingly. But by default, they're basically turned off. And then on each track, there's an aux send to this reverb track. So for folks who like to do the sort of reverb tails and reverb throws, you can do it any number of ways. You could either automate the send volume like so, and then the reverb will creep up. Just play the end of it, and it will.
No plans today. So I took this
overhitting it right now.
Island.
Burning it
Remember
up,
that day?
overloading
Luna
it.
Park, steep.
But you can do that kind of stuff with a little bit more thoughtfulness than what I'm doing, because I maxed it way out. Or you can also just, move stuff down to the reverb, and this will be a totally wet reverb, but you could do like a crossfade between the two of these things. So you could like cut and then mute that one and turn this on, and then.
So I flipped the postcard over, and handwritten in script.
So there are any number of ways to skin that cat, but you have them all at your fingertips. Sound effects bus is pretty similar to the music bus, just without the ducking. I don't tend to think that sound effects need to be ducked in response to voice. So all of this stuff is then getting routed to the master track, which you can see on the side here, or you can also bring into your mixer if you want to see it that way. You can do either one. They're all fine. But just like these normal tracks, the master track has an FS box. And that's where the Uleen loudness meter, for those of you who have been with me from the beginning of this, that's where the Uleen loudness meter comes in. So the idea here is that we're looking for loudnesses that are hovering around -23 because that's what our loudness meter is attuned to. And let's just see how, let's turn off the music. And I have a sense that something funky kind of happened here.
Amazing sort of retro font. And then little snapshots in each letter, the quintessential
so
images
this is
of
like
Coney
what I would
Island,
consider pretty good level.
like a lovely pinup babe coming out of the sea,
in those little red
and the roller
moments, but it's
coaster
not staying there too
scaffolding,
long.
and iconic New York City buildings, and the long stretch of beach.
Maybe it's like a tad hot, but we can adjust that on a moment to moment. This is also a piece that I mixed years ago, so before some of these standards were standard. So this is kind of the way of checking if your levels are in the right ballpark. After that, I have a very not smartly tuned, but not hurtfully tuned multiband compressor for anyone who does multiband compression. It's really not doing a ton right now. And then ultimately, this is the important thing. There's a master limiter at the end, and this is bringing the overall noise floor, overall volume level from -23 to -18. So I have a threshold of -7, excuse me, and a ceiling of -2, which is pretty conservative. But I feel like there's been a little bit of a movement away from -1 as the ceiling. And I think different engineers will have different thoughts about that, but I'm being conservative here. So the idea is that this will result in a mix with if you follow the whole procedure, a mix that is pretty reliably giving you -18 LUFS, and has a peak ceiling of -2 decibels. What's the difference between VST, AU, VST3? Well, AUs are only for Mac for one, so I use the VST version so it could work for both PC and Mac. Functionally, there is no difference. It's referencing the same code and stuff. I think there might be some behind-the-scenes things about like how efficient or how they use. Honestly, I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass now. So there are differences, but not meaningful differences, in my opinion. Yeah. Let me look at my notes, but I feel like I just sort of, for those of you who stuck with me, it was like maybe a kind of like having a fire hose. Is that the standard setting for all podcasts? Uline? Well, there are different. Uline is actually not my favorite version of this. It's a free one that's very good. My favorite is Insight by Isotope 2, actually Insight 2, which looks like this and adds a whole bunch of other funky metering, which is more processor intensive. But I have it set up just as loudness metering right now, but this is a way of like looking at the whole
postcard
picture of what's happening.
Faded and a little bit tattered on the side.
And it can be fun. It can be fun to explore. So I think what I should do maybe to close out is just play what this whole thing looks like with the Uline as a demo session. It'll just be like a 4-minute thing. I think it's 4 minutes. And then I can open it up for questions for any of y'all who are still with me. How about I take a poll? Would you rather hear this piece by Shruti Penamaneni, which is lovely and sweet, or would you rather hear the last piece that I did for Love and Radio, which is more Love and Radio, a little bit raunchier? Okay. This is the last piece I did for Love and Radio called Doing the No-No. I haven't actually checked this against the Uline.
I made a sculpture of Uranus's castrated penis. Apparently, Kronos cut off his father's penis and threw it in the ocean, in the Peloponnesian Sea. He cut off his father's penis because his mother gave birth to a 100-handed titan, like a centipede human. And Uranus was so grossed out by the mutant with 100 hands that he kept that being, that person, his child, inside a cave, inside of a castle. Even some people say he pushed it back up into his wife Gaia's vagina. At which point she told her son Kronos, why don't you go cut his dick off, right? And he did. He sliced off his father's penis and he threw it in the sea. And from the foam and blood of the leaking castrated penis of Uranus came Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. It's a strange myth. I didn't know really much about it. I had gone for the centipede thing because I thought, well, maybe I'll make a person with 100 hands someday. But every time someone chooses someone else to make a baby with, they're making a freak for their own pleasure. It doesn't matter if it's random recombination. It doesn't matter if it's based on love. It doesn't matter if this being is cared for, sent to like a really nice preschool, you know, or fed well, or fed a bunch of crap. What matters is reproduction itself is kind of like a freak show, right? You want people to see your display of fertility. You want people to see that you have the wealth to go ahead and procreate. You want people to see your child perform a piano recital. And you want to be able to show off that your genes were worthy of getting to the next generation. It's really kind of sad. Breeding is narcissism. It's like your little mirror, right? I was in a meeting that was talking about the ethics of genetic modification, and they asked parents to raise their hand if they would be willing to pay an extra $5,000 or $10,000 to have children with guaranteed perfect pitch, so that they would, you know, basically not need to pay for all those piano lessons, right? And most parents were like, yeah, that's cheaper in the long run. I mean, and that's partly what they were thinking, but they were also thinking, I'd like a kid who's a good musician. But I do know when people go for genetic counseling, if they were offered not only to eliminate negative traits, but to add positive traits, as long as you put a price tag on it, someone's going to hit buy it now. It's the other side of the mountain effect. And it's what will drive personal genetic alteration. There are certain people that think that the human genome is sacrosanct, that it's okay to engineer every other organism on Earth except for humans. Humans have to do it the old-fashioned way, by luck, including losing through luck. And there are other people that really think that we should just go forward as fast as possible and are actually actively engaging in projects like this. It's not illegal. There's an uncovering of everything, like a new Magellan-like map of the inner world of our genome. But the purposes that will be put towards are not necessarily health-based. Obviously, the military wants to make super soldiers. Obviously, we have a space program to look after, and we want to be able to live on Mars. We're going to need some special humans for that. What's interesting to me is to help people understand all the ways they could go in. What are the other ways that this could go that might even be preferable? What if we became solar powered, right? Like what if humans actually could photosynthesize? What would be good about that? Well, you wouldn't need to pay rent because you'd have central heating. You wouldn't need to work because all you have to do is sit in a hammock. Skin cancer would probably go up. People around the equator would become obese. The Nordic races would be suddenly really skinny and have to run down to the equator during the winter, like at the dark, suicidal end of the long night. And, you know, in a neo-colonialist way, probably eat some really overweight, equatorian, solar-powered people. And weirdly, we might actually grow to be flat and have webs underneath our arms that collect more sun. That could be a problem, but it could be great. Like a giant, flat, bat-like, solar-collecting human beatnik.
From Radiotopia, you're listening to Love and Radio. I'm Nick Vanderkolk. Today's episode, Doing the No-No, featuring Adam Zaretsky.
Cool. So that's how I use the template to make radio. Would happily open up the mics if you just want to chat for a little bit. I am like tired after all that. This took a lot out of me. But yeah, would happily just chat for a bit because I think that might be a more effective way than the actual text chat. Or you can text chat if that's your jam. Oh, this episode was already released. Oh, we're recording of this, like today, you mean? Let's see. This is the first time I kind of want to like see how it. What do you all think? Do you think it's suitable for the public? I might want to edit out some of the installation challenges and stuff, but yeah. So yeah, maybe. I think my intention is to try. I don't know if this is like going to be the same time I do it every week, but like maybe make it a Friday thing, because I would like to get this out there, and I've got the time at the moment to do it. And like I said, I want to be a little bit disruptive, so it's giving me a sense of purpose in a pandemic. Someone asked about the number 4 on Reaper. That number 4 is the low pass filter automation point. So like right here, you can see that's where it's automated and then going back up. So slowly
There's an uncovering of
down.
everything, like a new Magellan-like map of the inner world of our genome.
simultaneously along with a volume fade.
But the purpose is that will be put toward
And then when the music comes back up,
became solar-powered,
it's like
right?
going from
like what if humans
a
actually
very
could
closed
photosynthesize?
low pass filter to all the way
What
over.
would be good about that? Well, you wouldn't need to pay rent because you'd have central heating.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of info. This is kind of how I often teach, though. I'm sort of like, you got to learn this thing and then that thing. And, Oh, thanks, Emily. Sure, I would accept donations if you're so inclined. My Venmo is my same as my Twitter handle, so I'll leave that up to you. But that's a personal choice. That's not why I'm doing this.
So actually, I have a question, Brendan.
Yeah.
I have a template that I've been using for my podcast, and a lot of the things you showed can help a lot. Just like that hover cut thing, it sounds so simple, but it's so much time of just having that function. But there's so much more. My question is there, if I bring one of my older projects onto the template, how is it going to translate? And because I see I can more or less already, I can put the host track on one of the studio tracks. I can and the guest one too, of course. Then I can put the music down here. But is it going to be easy, let's say, to find my groove in the new template versus the old one? Just because I see that there's so much happening, like kind of hidden in the background. Is it easy to kind of adopt this if I already have kind of my flow?
Well, if you have your own flow, I think you will know how to reverse engineer it probably and customize it for your own needs, which you're totally welcome to do. I think I've shown you most of the behind the scenes stuff that's happening. I don't think that there's a lot happening that you don't know about if you've been following this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I make these kind of templates for other shows and shops, and there are people who are not engineer types who have been using this for years and has worked really well for them. Caitlin Press, the Heart, she's used it for years and years, and so it is meant to be very straightforward and simple, but it seems like you also have an awareness of the ways in which maybe there are things that you'd want to do differently, or I think the big thing, the real big thing about this is the automatic loudness normalization, going through the compressors and limiters in the way that I've set them. And philosophically, I'm more into do less to the audio. I don't like super heavy compression. But there are some shows that that's the aesthetic, and that's fine. And so I think it should be pretty simple for you to use it.
Yeah. No, the thing is, in my case, specifically now, but I have a lot of people, my guests are on Zoom. Not all of them are very savvy, and I end up getting just the Zoom recording.
Yeah.
And on my setup, I kind of go for the compression. I tweak, and women voices versus men's voices, I tweak the compression in the different bands myself often. And here, I think I just need to probably explore more how it's being done to feel like I'm kind of doing the same that I was before.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. Well, what's your experience with female voices versus male voices? In terms of that.
I mean, I'll just say out front that I try to listen to the voice if there's a specific issue that sibilance is maybe the biggest thing that comes up. But I don't tend to treat women's voices differently than male voices. I think that's also just philosophically, I'm not into that. If there's a sibilance problem, that's something that I am fine with, but or not fine with, that I would correct or try to correct. But I tend to like people's voices the way they are. So, and especially with compression, I think compression should be applied equally, because this is really, I'm kind of
almost religious.
Well, yeah, I think that there's a power dynamic when you're talking about the level of someone's voice and who's getting compressed more, and I don't know, it's just it opens up these things that I think I would rather. I like to get them all up to the same loudness, and the loudness normalization at the very beginning of the stage does a lot of that work for me. And then if there's something like a sibilance or a resonance or a bassiness, by all means, go for that. But I don't like to do too much treatment. I think less is more, personally. And that's something that I've come to after a long time. I used to EQ a lot and compress a lot, and now I'm much more I kind of like it when it's more open and neutral, and that's my philosophy.
Sounds good. But like you said, I think I'm going to be able to play with this and maybe take one of those projects, re-render it from here, and then get a feel of, okay, how is this different from what I got on the other side? I think, anyway, yeah, totally. Thank you so much. This was great.
Adam, I see you've got your hand raised.
I typically edit in Pro Tools, and I was just curious, in comparison to that, I use the audio suite editing in Pro Tools for cleaning up dialogue tracks, with the isotope denoise and things like that.
Right.
So how would you do that in Reaper in comparison to that? Because when I'm cleaning up a dialogue track in Pro Tools, I would add something like spectral denoise through audio suite on top of the entire dialogue track. And if I wanted to do something like that in Reaper, would it be adding the effect like you did with the the Shift E command onto just the item, or how would you do that?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one way of doing it, and I do it that way sometimes as well. I think when it comes to voice denoising, I often do run just kind of a general voice denoiser on the voice track, gently. And I think a lot of times with these noise reduction, actually what I really do is, if I'm doing something documentary related, I take the raw file and I'll run it through isotope before I do any editing. So I like kind of broadband deal with the issue before I start editing. I will say I really dislike using Audio Suite for noise reduction because it creates these new files, and especially when you're working with producers like myself who are indecisive and like to have the ability to change the story and add new things. Like I inherited something from another producer, another editor. I inherited something from a that was mixed by another person, and like they weren't able to make it in the time frame or whatever, and got the session in a state where like some of the stuff was audio suited and some of it wasn't, and I had to really like kind of get in there and reverse engineer it. And I think philosophically it's a more respectful thing when you're collaborating with other people to try to do the least destructive thing possible. And that's one of the reasons why I like using the Shift-E thing, is because unlike Audio Suite, it's not creating a new file. It is using extra plug-in CPU power for that moment when the item is being processed. You can also tell Reaper, like, okay, now take this item and render it as a new thing. That's totally fine. But as a workflow, I like referencing the original files, and I like sticking to that. And because things get recut all the time, and it just feels like better practice to me.
Okay.
Jason?
Hey, does my audio work? I haven't checked it, and I don't have a headset,
Yep.
so.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I think the question was already answered. I put it in text earlier that if I wanted to take bits and pieces of this, I've already been taking notes on the stuff I like, and I'm probably just going to like pull up my preferences thing and pull up that, because I don't remember what I changed that I like, but like my muscle memory felt all awkward. I felt there was so much cool stuff, but I was pressing all the wrong buttons. I was like a Cheeto with roller skates on or something.
Yeah.
But if I was doing like import export, could I like, I don't know, because I know I would be able to find the actions easily, but for like some of the visual stuff you've changed and for some of the template stuff, would I be able to just export half of your changes and then like do the action thing piece by piece? Or
Well,
what do you think is the most efficient way to do it?
If you find the answer to that, please let me know. I don't have a great, like, I know that you can check this, different boxes, but I would love to have a more nuanced understanding of how the import export configuration works. And honestly, that was something I was experimenting with before this thing, because the way I normally would do it was check all the boxes, and then I would have a very like 100 megabyte, 200 megabyte configuration file. But I was also,
I don't know what the boxes do. So
yeah, but I was also including stuff that I wouldn't want to share with everyone. That wouldn't make sense to share with everyone. Ambisonic stuff and stuff from basically everything I've ever done in Reaper. kind of. So what I shared was, this is a snapshot of the basic elements of what I do now, without some of the more weird stuff. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. I would love to know it. I do know, you probably already know that you can go to options and themes. And I used to have a bunch of, like, I've played around with different themes, so like you can just make it look like the original Reaper very quickly. I just think that this is not as aesthetically pleasing as the one that I've chosen.
I don't actually like how the original Reaper looks, so I'm with you on that.
No, I've never been a fan of their original, user interface style, and it's a personal thing, I guess. But I like flat design. I like colors. I like, I don't like skeuomorphic stuff.
Oh, and I meant to ask on the actions menu. I know that like any completely new custom actions that you've put, you can search custom and get all of them. But for like actions that used to exist that you just put a new hotkey for, is there any way to search for those changes, or do I just have to like,
I don't know,
look at two lists?
Yeah, you'd have to look at two lists. However, well, this is sort of a half answer to your question. You could import and export your key map. So you can just do the key shortcuts right here. But if you've done any digging around here, this is something I haven't shown everyone yet. So just to close that idea, you can import and export the key command separately from all the other configuration stuff, and that's a way of getting a little bit of nuance. you can restore to the factory defaults. I see that now. This is how my experience with Reaper is like, or, oh, I guess you can do that thing too, huh?
Yeah, no, I never noticed that button, huh?
I will say there's a ton of stuff happening in the mouse modifiers section. And for anyone who's dug into Reaper, this is super powerful. But like, I changed the behavior of the way that it, like, you did automation points, because I wanted it to be more like what felt intuitive to me, and based on Ableton and based on Pro Tools. And so all of that stuff, it happens under, if you go into preferences and you scroll down to mouse modifiers, basically there's a context for every place you could potentially put your mouse in the whole program. And then what do you do when you double click? What do you do when you left drag? In some cases, what do you do when you right drag? What do you do when you right drag and shift command? And so like, I've gone through a lot of this over many years and tweaked it in a way that is working for me, but is different from the stock Reaper configuration and feels like more like what I see in other DAWs.
Oh, did you make the hover stuff in here?
No, the hover stuff I think is all done through Action List.
Okay.
Any other questions? Raise your hand or just open your mic. I feel like.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you
for joining.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Question about, can you talk for a second about bouncing stems?
Oh, I didn't talk about bouncing. Okay, people are going to have to learn that on their own. I was like, oh, I knew I was missing something important. Bouncing.
And is there any batch processing capabilities?
Yes and yes. So let me just talk about that really quick. The way that I bounce, you can just bounce the entire project, but oftentimes if you work in radio, probably you've done this where like there's extra stuff happening after the edit, or like test audio, or like other assemblies and stuff. So the way that I bounce is I select all or highlight all from the part that I want to export. This is actually something that I took from Logic. So I hit the C key for cycle. That's how I think about it. And that creates a time region from the beginning to end. And then I go to File and Render. But the render dialog has a bunch of options. So by default, I think it's export entire project. I do export time selection. That's why I have the cycle thing set up the way I do. But you can create regions, like individual regions, and have it like export in chunks like that. You can, instead of exporting the master mix, you can select different tracks or stems. You can do master mix and stems. And there are a bunch of other macro type things, or they call them wildcards. They're not macros, but like data that you can put in. So like, it's sort of like a hashtag, or it's $, and then like track name or project name or tempo or any of these things. So it goes pretty deep of the types of things that you want to do. And then as far as batching goes, I haven't done a ton of batch rendering, but it would be probably done through what they call regions, which is sort of like a mark. It's like a marker if a marker was time bracketed. So you can export that, but then there's also a really powerful batch converter. So you can, this is not quite what you're asking, but move this. I got to move my zoom controls so I can move this. You can also just drag and drop files from your Finder in here, but you can, change the sample rate, change the format. You can do a bunch of stuff. So there is a lot of batch potential, but it's not something that I have a lot of deep experience with.
Awesome, thanks. And one just general question I have, like workflow, when it comes to like perhaps starting a project using Reaper, is you said you were sort of you believed in sort of like the one DAW per project kind of philosophy. If sometimes I may begin sketching stuff out before I get tracking, but the tracking will generally always come as a edited like Pro Tools session that I will, import into my work. And I love being able to, still have flexibility with the region in and out points, and to be able to still have sort of all those edit features once I import things. And so I'm just wondering, to be able to preserve something like that, to be able to import into Reaper would make it like a no-brainer, kind of. And I guess like part of the like evangelical side of or the proselytizing side of your work here is, it's like, well, if more shops started from Reaper, well, that problem would be solved for me. But yeah, I'm just wondering how you work around something like that. I mean, do you ever like render stuff in Pro Tools and just import it and say, hell with it, hell with it?
The ability to go back and make changes.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I usually either bite the bullet or I'm trying to bring this up here. 1 second. It's not loading. Stand by. Where is this? Oh, here it is. Just took a minute to load because I'm loading it in emulation on a Mac and it's a PC program. So this is a AA translator, as some folks have had some experience with. It theoretically translates, in this case, you could say Pro Tools, or actually that's Pro Tools PTF. We want a PTX. Where is it? PTX to RPP. And I've had some conversations with the developer, and they update it. I think it's just a one-person operation. There's someplace in Australia. So this actually does more powerful stuff than AAF and OMF, but it has quirks, and it works great going into Reaper. It does not work great going from Reaper to Pro Tools. So what you're describing, this is like a $200 way of doing exactly what you're asking for with pretty good results. Obviously no plugin information. It's like basic mixed data, but it has all the handles. And it's not like an OMF where you have to say like, I'm only doing a 10-second handle. It's like it's referencing the files in the same way. So I use this. If I'm in a project where I know it's not going back to Pro Tools, I'll use this.
That's great.
But
and same for it'll also import like importing markers would be really helpful too.
It does.
Think
right here.
That,
import
right?
markers.
Yeah. Fab. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, should we call it a day? It's been a long day.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
sticking
much,
it out.
Brandon. Thank you.
All right. Cool. Well, have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Use these tools well and make some awesome radio. Change the world.
Great. And you go rest
right.
your voice and maybe your head.
Yeah, I can feel it in my voice right now. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.